Welcome to Changing the Course, Building an Antiracist Education. My name is Nicholas Jones, and I currently serve as the role of Manager of Student Support and Culture here at Noble Schools. Noble Schools is a leading charter network in Chicago, Illinois, serving over 12,000 students, 17 high schools, and 1 middle school. Noble is in the midst of executing a massive overhaul of our policies and practices to provide an anti-racist experience for our students. Changing the Course is a video podcast series about our journey through these changes and what it looks like for grades 6 through 12 public schools to build anti-racist classrooms. Today, I'm here with Dr. J, Senior Director of Student Support and Culture, to talk about this process of creating anti-racist education. Dr. J, thanks for joining us today.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
How are you feeling this morning?
I'm feeling good. Can't complain at all.
Awesome. So you want to kind of jump straight in, but before we do that, we want to give our listeners the opportunity to learn more about you. So can you talk to us a little bit more about who you are, how what joined you to this work?
Yeah, so as you stated, my name is Janine Franklin, affectionately known as Dr. J. And I have been in education for about a decade now. I started off kind of as a school social worker. I have my MSW from UIC, Jane Addams School of Social Work. Kind of after doing that work, for me, being a social worker solidified the need for really policy change to make sure that our students, specifically our Black and Brown students, right, had kind of equitable access to resources, supports, et cetera, in schools. That actually prompted me to pursue my PhD. So I was in the College of Education at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I completed my PhD. There I did a bunch of different work. So I was an advisor. I was also an instructor, teaching kind of DEI and equity classes, social justice type of work. And then alongside of that as well, for me, my research was really about kind of Black girls and culture and discipline, specifically with white teachers. And so exploring kind of the dissonance that came between what our Black students were expressing or communicating or verbalizing and the interpretation thereof by adults in the space, and how that impacted their access to higher education, their choices, their relationships with staff in schools. And so after finishing that work, it prompted me, for me, it was really about, I wanted to do the work, right? So before kind of going into teaching and research, I wanted to continue to do the work at a community level. And what does this look like? And what does this mean for us? And so that prompted me to then actually become the director of college prep at Gary Comer Youth Center on the south side of Chicago in Grand Crossing neighborhood. So I was there for a few years doing the work. That's actually how I got introduced to Noble. So a lot of my recruiting of students to do kind of like college prep and college access work were our South Side schools, CPS, and Noble schools. It also allowed me the opportunity to push into senior seminar at Gary Comer College Prep to do some work with Gary Comer Middle School. So that was really my introduction to Noble and how Noble operated and worked, et cetera. I left actually Gary Comer and went to University of Chicago. So I was on the DEI team in the provost office there. As their director for pipeline programs. So that's the work that I did there, specifically recruiting underrepresented students into a lot of our programs, ensuring that they had access to higher education, to graduate education, et cetera. And then just really felt a desire and pull to come back to this space. And so as luck would have it, this role came about. Of course, I still had lots of relationships and connections here at Noble, and just facilitated a call about what this role could look like. And that's how I ended up here, how I ended up doing this work. And it was such an apropos time to do this work because it really is an extension of the work that I started in graduate education, right, at U of I. And so I was able to continue this work around culture and discipline and what that means, and really push for a counter narrative, right, of what we typically hear about Black and Brown students, and the narrative and the perception that often sometimes our biases bring about them and their ability, and et cetera. And so now here I am doing the work and trying to facilitate that for Noble and what that means within this anti-racist framework.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Luckily, Noble is lucky to have you with us this year. And with the vast experience that you do have, you're now leading the student support and culture team. What role does that team play in creating an anti-racist education under your leadership?
Oh, absolutely. So I chuckle at this question because typically when people ask about like, what does your team do? It's just like, if it's not in the classroom and it's still inside the building, that's us, right? Like that is the work that we do. And so I really see this team, the role of our team being kind of the central core to what student support looks like. It is one thing to be in a classroom and have academic standards and expectations and make sure our students are learning and thriving academically. However, what we do know, and this is from research and experience, is that oftentimes, and not even oftentimes, every time, our students are bringing their whole selves into this space, right? So just like me as an adult, when I come into work, I am bringing what happened that morning. I may be bringing what happened with my family that week. I may be bringing like I'm stressed out about, in that particular time in my life. I bring all of that with me to work, right? And I, as an adult, have to navigate what that looks like so that I can be successful. The same is for our students. The difference is they're still learning that, right? And so like they are bringing their whole selves to our space. They are bringing things from home, from their community, from their own personal triggers or trauma if they have it, right? They're bringing all of that. And so it's really important. And I see our team being the core and the crux of how do we make sure we are holistically supporting students? So not just with discipline, right? When we think about behavioral management, right? Our focus is behavioral growth. How do we encourage our students and teach our students the skills to make better decisions? But that also means SEL, social and emotional learning, right? How do we infuse SEL at our campuses so they feel empowered and competent and confident in ensuring that from curriculum to student support, SEL is there and is represented and it is happening. When we think about how do we leverage the expertise of our social workers, right? That's also under our team. Like, how do we make sure that they are leveraged as experts and they are also empowered to lead that work at their campuses for the benefit of our students and our families? So I really do see the student support team as the core of holistic student support outside of academic spaces and also still influencing our academic spaces as well, right? The hope and the goal is to even be able to see in our curricula SEL represented, right? That is what our team is here for, is to continue to do this work, continue to push ourselves about how do we conceptualize student support? What does that look like for our people? What does that look like for our students? Leveraging and centering our student voices and our family voices in that work as well, and implementing and operationalizing that at all of our campuses. What NCP moves and pushes us to do, instead of saying that's one, we now ask why, right? Why is this behavior